Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today here, brought to you by Californians for the Arts. I'm Julie Baker, Executive Director of Californians for the Arts, and our partner organization, California Arts Advocates, where we employ a lobbyist to work on getting resources, funding for the arts, as well as legislation to support and protect the arts and creative sector. We have an excellent webinar here for you today about how to effectively advocate in your local communities, whether it's county or cities, for CARES Act funding. And we have some amazing speakers, so I'm really excited to have you all here with us. I am just going to talk a little bit, what do we call this? Color, whatever the phrase is where you're trying to fill it. I'm doing the filler here. And just as people load in, we have over 200 people signed up, so I want to give everyone a chance to come in. And just some housekeeping stuff. There will be a time for Q&A at the end of the presentations. So please, when you have a question, please put it in the Q&A feature, the box there. Also, if you want to start introducing yourselves in the chat feature, we would love to see who's here on the call. It's always fun for all the participants to see that. Just make sure you say it to all panelists and attendees if you want also everyone who's here today to see who's on the call. So if you would start doing that. Thank you. Hello and welcome. So just going to give it a couple more minutes as people are coming into the webinar today. And again, I'm Julie Baker, Executive Director of Californians for the Arts. We're so pleased you're here. This is really important to talk about how to access some of the funds that are coming from the federal government right now. And they're coming into the state as well as into your cities and into your counties. We've got some great success stories to share, as well as sort of the how to be an effective advocate. Really, that's an important piece of how we do our work over the years. And I always like to say advocacy is a long game. So if you haven't been in it, this is a terrific and critical time to get started. If you've been doing it for a long time, you know how important relationships are with your elected officials, whether they be city council, school board members, your supervisors, and your elected state senators, and your assembly members, as well as your congressional representatives. So, you know, they are elected, meaning that they are there for you as your constituents. So really do reach out. This is an important time for us to be raising our voice collectively for the arts and culture sector. As we know, what's been happening as we've been shut down in terms of our ability to earn revenue. I just want to assure you that at Californians for the Arts and our partner organization, California Arts Advocates, we are out there lobbying as well as messaging and coming up with ways to propose how artists and the arts sector can be seen as part of the solution in terms of the recovery of California. And I think that's really important in looking at how we are also essential workers here in California, and to be valued, to be paid, to be compensated, how critical we are to our communities. All of us who are on this call, and I see all these wonderful names coming in, you know this because you do this work, and you do this because you know the impact that it makes in your communities and what it does for people's lives, and how we are second responders in our communities providing these vital services. So I just assure you we continue to do that work here at Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and just start on what today's webinar is about. So as many as you know, on March 27th, the CARES Act, a $2 trillion bill in response to the coronavirus, was signed into law. There are many provisions to the CARES Act that provides opportunities for fundings and loans for individuals, nonprofits, and businesses. Today, we will explore how you can best access these resources with a particular emphasis on advocating at the local level for CARES Act funding. We will hear from 4 panelists, including Nina Azlu-Tunselli, Chief Counsel of Government and Public Affairs at Americans for the Arts and Executive Director of Americans for the Arts Arts Action Fund. David Holland, Director of Public Policy, Western States Arts Federation, or commonly known as Westhoff. Denny Mangers, Strategic Advisor for Arts and Culture to Mayor Darrell Steinberg, City of Sacramento, and Rick Stein, President and CEO of Arts Orange County and board member of Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. And I'm also pleased we have a special guest with us here today, Deborah Lucera, who's the Executive Director of Friend of the Arts Upstate and a Butte County Supervisor who will give us not only a rural perspective, but an elected's perspective. Just a couple more things to note. On July 1st, Governor Gavin Newsom signed the Budget Act of 2021. We have good news to report for the arts sector in that the $26 million in funding to the California Arts Council, the state arts agency, was protected. This is good news for right now. We always have to keep our eye on things. I also want to mention that the California Arts Council is doing listening sessions tomorrow, I think, through Friday. If you haven't signed up for those, please do, because this is a chance for you to raise your voice in talking about what do you need right now from the State Arts Agency in terms of funding and resources and that sort of thing. So please look at that at their website. I also wanted to mention that the budget provides a portion of the state's CARES Act funding to local governments, $500 million to cities and $1.3 billion to counties to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, in my community, I live in a rural community, Nevada County, about an hour outside of Sacramento, we're getting $10 million. And so this is a great time. If you're in these smaller communities under 300,000 and cities of populations under 300,000, you're starting to get these funds now. They're coming in. So make sure you're addressing that, and we'll talk more about that. Today's webinar will be a combination of presentations by our panelists as well as a conversation moderated by me. There'll be time for Q&A, and again, we ask that you kindly put those questions into the Q&A function on your screen, not in the chat box, if you will. So let's get started. Will you please welcome Nina Azo-Tuncelli from Americans for the Arts, who will help provide a brief overview, because you only get 10 minutes on the CARES Act, so she's got a lot to cover, and the opportunities for the arts creative sector to access resources and funds. Welcome, Nina. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure to be here, and they're going to be putting up a slide for some URLs that I want to promote today during my talk. I first want to thank you, Julie, for your leadership in the Board of Californians for the Arts. You're great advocates at the state level, but everyone on the call should also know that they are also wonderful advocates at the federal level in helping to advance these federal appropriations and opportunities for funding through the CARES Act. So let's get started in breaking down multi-trillion dollars of funding in what is probably now 9 minutes. So one of the things that I think probably a lot of you might be familiar with already is back in early March, I created a CARES Act table that I fairly regularly update at least once a week with all new details that are constantly coming through, additional regulations through the US Treasury and things like that. And that can be found at the artsactionfund.org/CARES Act table. And it's essentially a document that looks like this. And what's helpful about it is that not only does it break down all the different areas of the CARES Act, but it breaks it down based on what could be applicable to you, whether you are a 501c3 nonprofit, a governmental arts agency, a for-profit business involved in the arts, an individual gig worker, corporation S chapter, LLC, 1099 worker, self-employed type of artists, and then just individual taxpayers. And it just takes it one by one, each of the programs, and which one might be right for you, because I regularly do office Zoom hours to explain the CARES Act table and customize advice for people who call in. It's Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And and I found that it can be very confusing. There are possible errors that can be made in accepting one kind of funding at the same time. So let's kind of begin with what's still available, because as you might imagine, this is now April, May, June, July, 3.5 months old. So a lot of funding has already been dispersed. Some of it not only got dispersed so fast that it had to be new additional funds had to be added. So the CARES Act is actually what was originally a $2 billion program is now a $3.2 billion program. So Let's first start with one of the most popular programs, which is the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. There's some really key updates here. One is that this was a program where you could apply through a commercial bank to receive a guaranteed SBA loan from the federal level to get funds to help pay for your payroll over a 2-month period. And it was based on what your payroll was, but if you were an independent contractor, it was based on your Schedule C, line 31 net profit. And so once you kind of put those together, you would submit it through the bank and you would get a loan. The big changes that have happened in the last 3 weeks is that, one, the level of forgiveness for these PPP loans, in order to turn what starts off as a loan debt into a forgiven grant that gets paid off by the SBA directly to your bank or financial lender that you receive the PPP loan for. So they have created a forgiveness application, and that needs to be submitted in order to get forgiveness. It's not automatic. And there are obviously lots of rules on how to use the money and what the limits are. And it's primarily to pay for payroll, to keep people off of unemployment, and that becomes important in a moment, keep people off of unemployment, and to cover a little bit of some overhead costs. And examples of that are interest on a business mortgage, business rent, and utilities, things like that within your key covered period. So the changes that happened recently are that the coverage period got extended from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. And we have learned that there also is a possibility to have less than 24 weeks if a few things happen. One, you spend the money exactly the way it was intended to do, and you don't think that there's going to be any amount that you have to give back. And you qualify to complete the easy form of the forgiveness application. All this can also be found on artsactionfund.org, and there's a special section just for forgiveness application of the CARES Act. So if you can do that, you don't have to necessarily wait the full 24 weeks to be able to complete the covered period of your PPP. This becomes helpful for those who are independent contractors who are not allowed to get a PPP loan to pay yourself and collect pandemic unemployment compensation. So you want to be smart about staggering it. In California, the unemployment payout is quite high compared to other states that I deal with, which is very low as $87, as I understand it, in South Dakota, where you can go as high as $500 or more in California. So it's quite significant. New York is another really good one. So a lot of independent contractors have chosen to stay on pandemic unemployment and forego the process of submitting a PPP application. But what is helpful that recently happened, and this just happened on 4th of July when the president signed into law an extension of being able to apply for a PPP. So the deadline was June 30th, and now it's been extended to August 8th. And many independent contractors are going to remain on pandemic unemployment because they're getting that extra $600 plus the state level unemployment on a weekly basis. So it's a significant amount of money. And so some are deciding to stay on unemployment, but that is due, that extra $600 portion is due to run out on July 25th. And so by extending the PPP to August 8th, it gives you an opportunity, if you choose to not stay on just the state level unemployment, which was considerably lower, and now move on to a PPP loan. It's a good strategy to think about doing and going on a PPP covered period that begins on July 26th or after, so that you don't have any overlap. There's still plenty of money left over in the PPP. There's over $130 billion left. And in fact, for those of you who are curious about who's getting all this PPP money, over $500 billion has already been released. The US Treasury did a major data dump as a result of an agreement that they made with Congress that was insisting on transparency on who received these grants, these forgivable loans, I should say. And so if you go to the US Treasury's press release section, you will see that they have released an enormous amount of data on millions of loans that have been given out as of June 30th, along with the NAICS codes so that you can track whether they're cultural organizations or not. We know within the arts entertainment sector that there is close to $8 billion that's been given to these types of organizations. The big difference here is that it's only showing this kind of detail for those who got forgivable loans of $150,000 or more. And if it's less than $150,000, that kind of detailed data has not been provided for privacy purposes, because this is where the gig workers came into play. A lot of gig workers are applying under their own name with their own personal home address. So they didn't want to supply that kind of information. And I think a lot of nonprofit arts groups and individual gig workers fall into that category. I can see from the questions that someone's already asking something that we're getting ahead to, but I'm going to go ahead and answer it. And that is there a chance to, with the extension of the PPP, to get a second bite of the apple and get a second round of a PPP loan? Because if you applied like most people in April, you've run out of money already. And the answer to that right at this moment is no. This extension is merely an extension of a deadline for first-time borrowers to apply. It is not an extension that allows you to have a second round. However, we definitely have a legislative campaign going on, and that goes to my third URL below, where we have action alerts. And yesterday on 7/6, we released an action alert that you can participate, send a letter to your House of Representatives member and your 2 senators to do 2 things. One is because there's so much money left over in the PPP program, $130 billion, we want a second ability to have our cultural organizations, especially those that fall into that kind of hospitality, tourism, arts, entertainment sector, the ones that were the first to close and the ones that will be the last to reopen. And we're asking for an effort to specifically allow those entities to be able to have a second PPP loan possibility. So that is going to be debated in Congress this month, and we'll see what happens with that. The second thing that we're looking to see happen is that there is an extension of pandemic unemployment compensation, the extra $600 that goes to state eligible W-2 employees who are furloughed and to these gig workers. Those are the 2 most pressing things. A lot of this is going to be debated in the second half of July when Congress is in session. But at the end of July, the House will leave, and the next chance of legislation happening will be after Labor Day. So when you see these action alerts come from Juli or from me, please respond to them, because we're not kidding. This is the window of time to get something done. Otherwise, an entire lapse of funding is going to happen. And we want to make sure that they get retained. I had a lot more information to give you, but I just want to add that if there is a second round of a CARES Act, in addition to the 2 items that I just mentioned, I think you're probably looking at another round of stimulus checks that you got from the IRS. And you're also looking at something Senator Mitch McConnell, who's the majority leader of the Senate, really wants, and that's liability insurance for those companies that do have employees and customers coming into their businesses, to provide them liability coverage in case there is a spread of COVID-19 while they're open for business. I'll stop there.
Nina, there's so much to talk about. I mean, there's a lot, and the CARES Act is now, you said, over $3 trillion. So I encourage everyone to check out the Arts Action Fund. It was actually in the information that we sent, and to go to Nina's open office hours. And definitely, we sent an action alert yesterday, what Nina referenced as well in our email blast. So please do respond to those. It does make a difference, and we'll have some time time for Q&A. Nina, you left already, but I just wanted to mention, I think I read something like $7.8 billion was in the arts and entertainment sector accessed for PPP. Is that about right?
Yeah, it actually went up to 7.9 since since I last released that information.
And I think that's important to mention because, we see these announcements about $2 billion from the UK and things like that. And it's not that we don't want that type of relief, but at the same time, recognizing that the PPP aspect, Forgivable loan, has actually provided close to $8 billion to our sector. So I do want people to know that and to know that your advocacy is paying off in terms of that as well.
And that's on top of all the money from pandemic unemployment compensation, direct NEA CARES grants, and what you'll hear from some of your other guests today, the state and local COVID block grants that arts organizations are taking advantage of as well.
And the announcement that the House just put forward $170 million from the NEA. Was it NEA?
So just like you announced your annual appropriations for the state, the federal government put out its annual appropriations, the first number. It's still going to go through a process, but they increased funding for the NEA and the NEH by over $6 million to bring it up to $170 million. That's exactly what groups like Juli and our group were asking Congress to adopt. So we feel very good about that number. That was the right number in an economic recession. So go us.
That's right. And again, a lot of this we want to make sure the wrap is advocacy works, become arts advocates, get active right now. If you've never done it before, now is the time to engage. But let's keep going here. Thank you, Nina. I'm pleased to introduce David Holland. David is the Director of Public Policy at Westhoff, Western States Arts Federation. David, thanks so much for being here. And I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to share my screen with you all so I can go through a few things with you today. Let me just get myself set.
Let's see.
My
We're
screen.
having a little.
Is it sharing?
It isn't sharing. I don't know if Jade, Alisa, who's behind the scenes, can do it because we have your slides as well. So maybe Jade, Alisa, you could try and access those slides really quickly. And in the meantime, David, maybe just mention some of the stuff that Westhoff specifically is offering right now. You got some exciting news with the Mellon Foundation, I think it was.
Yes, we recently concluded our CARES program and released the names of the awardees across our 13-state region. In addition to that, we have received some funds from the Mellon Foundation. Will be able to disperse about 1.7 million, 1.8 million across the region. And we're currently designing that program with guidelines to be released in the next week or so. And that will involve both the self-nomination process or peer nomination process, as well as the engagement of a range of regional advisors across the region who will also be making recommendations about organizations who will be invited to apply for that funding opportunity. The funding level for that, with our CARES funds, we disperse grants in the range of $20,000 to about 45 organizations. For this opportunity, we'll probably be funding fewer organizations, but at a higher level, with most grants being around 50,000, and then a few grants at 75,000 and very few at 100,000.
It looks like Jade, Alicia's got your slides, so go ahead.
All right, thank you, Jade, Alisa. So we can go to the first slide. I'm really going to focus on the two dimensions of the conversation for today, both what some of the opportunities are and then what some of the strategies are for accessing federal relief funding And then if I have any time, I will briefly just point you in the direction of some more expansive information that Westhoff has put together about funding opportunities through the private sector, what's been going on regionally, and a lot of different funding models from across the region that some of you may be inspired by in terms of thinking about opportunities for your organizations, or if you have the opportunity to actually set up relief funds, how you might go about doing that. So the opportunities as I see it in preparing for this presentation are several. So if we just start at the top, this is something that we're beginning to see happen, both pertaining to CARES funds and certainly the use of other funds as well. But as it pertains to CARES, an example from the region is that the city of Phoenix, Arizona has recently invested $2.6 million in its CARES funds into their Office of Arts and Culture to provide relief funding. That's one of the first of that specific type of cases that we've seen in the region, though there have been many other local governments that have put funds into their arts and cultural agencies through their own funds, like not using federal funds. But in terms of the use of federal funds, that's a good example. I think that there is an opportunity now to advocate at the local level as more local governments receive CARES funding to have that kind of opportunity come to your own community. I think in terms of the sharing screen, there's now something blocking the slides. Got it. All right, so the second opportunity beyond the investment of local government CARES funds into arts relief is investment of state arts agency CARES funds into local arts agencies. And in the case of California, this has already happened. The California Arts Council invested its CARES funding into the local arts agencies and its network, investing over $700,000 of those funds into that. The third level, I'd say, is investment of arts endowment CARES funds into local arts agencies. Again, this has already happened as well, at least in the round of funding that came through CARES so far. And the Arts Endowment dispersed 9 grants to local arts agencies that they're able to re-grant. 2 of those were in the state of California. Many of those were in our region, but it's only 9 in total, and that total figure is around 2.25 million, 500,000 of which was dispersed in California. So again, that opportunity has now passed. If the Arts Endowment were to receive further funds to disperse in the form of relief, then through the state and regional formula and through the allocation for their own grant making, they may be able to make additional investments. So far, in most of the proposals, at least, that have been put forward, the amount that the Arts Endowment would have to disperse in any future relief effort would be less than the 75 million that they received initially through CARES. So you'd expect these figures to probably be less, unless there's a turn for a much more significant investment of relief funds into the Arts Endowment. I'd say the next level is investment of state relief funds into statewide arts and culture programs. So this is beginning to happen as well. And we've seen 2 very recent examples from the Westhoff region, a 13-state region that obviously includes California. The Arizona Commission for the Arts recently was awarded $2 million. Governor Ducey recently made that announcement. This is after their agency's budget had not appeared in the budget that the legislature passed earlier in the year. So this is a major transition in the environment, and they're using the state relief funds, some of which come through CARES, to support this effort. In Utah, you saw a much more significant investment, 9 million of which is awarded to the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, which is their state arts agency. There's additional funds that will be made available to the arts and culture field through other agencies, tourism and the business department that will support arts and cultural activity and cultural tourism across the state as well. This is also using their state relief funds, most of which are drawn from the CARES funds that the state has received. So a lot of that that I just covered is the arts and culture specific opportunities and how they've cascaded through CARES to support state and local government and arts and cultural organizations directly through the grant making of various agencies, local and state, regional in the case of Westhoff, and national in the case of the Arts Endowment. The next three opportunities are really related to more broad-based and in many ways much more significant opportunities that are not specifically targeting arts and cultural organizations. So one to highlight is just through one aspect of what has happened through CARES, the funds that were dispersed through HUD. Some of these funds have been dispersed in the form of community development block grants. There can, in some cases, be challenges accessing those funds to support arts and cultural activity, and it does take some creativity and some advocacy to make those kinds of things happen. But I did want to highlight that just in California, HUD had made 183 awards using the CARES funds that were dispersed through its agency, totaling over $215 million. So those funds have been dispersed to local governments who are then setting up programs which will be further dispersing those funds to support various activities to support economic and community development, basically. Then the SBA, PPP, and EIDL loans, people speak about the EIDL loans a little bit less, but that's another key aspect of the SBA programs that are supporting organizations in addressing the challenges they're encountering related to COVID-19. So as has already been reported, Juli and Nina both discussed this, roughly $8 billion in PPP loans have been dispersed to arts, entertainment, and recreation entities nationally. And $68 billion in PPP loans have been dispersed in California. That's to all organizations, not just arts, entertainment, and recreation, and over 15 billion rather in EIDL loans in California as well. The last is just to say that in addition to those, many states are setting up and have already set up and will in all likelihood be setting up additional business loans and grant programs. So I chose to highlight Idaho Rebound so that you see other examples from the region. And obviously California has a program as well. Again, these are not targeting arts and cultural organizations specifically, but they're an opportunity alongside the SBA programs for organizations to receive support. So next slide, and then I will just round out with what some of the strategies are. So I'm gonna go through this very rapidly, but I think that there's 4 broad high-level strategies. One that many organizations are pursuing and many of you are participating today have clearly pursued already is direct applications to state arts agencies, to local arts agencies, to organizations like Westhoff. These are specifically targeting the arts. Many of these opportunities are now passed. Many of them are also oversubscribed, as some people call it, meaning that there's many more applications than awards can possibly be made. But there will likely be more opportunities created that will focus on recovery. And so I would keep my eyes open for additional opportunities as they are developed. I'd say specifically at the local arts agency level, even in terms of Westhoff, I mentioned the Mellon opportunity. Obviously, we will not be able to fund that many organizations. The next point, one that Juli and Nina have underscored greatly, is advocacy and lobbying of elected officials, so that they're aware of the needs of the field. I think that there have been the breakthroughs that I mentioned in Arizona and Utah, which were not looking favorable, came from advocacy directly to elected officials on the impact of COVID-19 on the arts and cultural field, and the opportunity to support a vital industry, to protect jobs, and to set a path for economic recovery for the state. And those efforts have been fruitful, and we're seeing that on the state level. And so I'd say that there's opportunities perhaps even in California for that. I think arts organizations and local arts agencies applying for the different federal relief programs that come from the local government level, the state level, the federal relief programs. And then I'd also say opportunities in some cases where they have aligned themselves with private philanthropy, et cetera, to bring more funding into the picture to support relief, particularly of individual artists, but also of arts organizations. And then generally educating arts organizations about business loan and business grant opportunities, which I know Americans for the Arts has put a lot of emphasis on. Could you just bring me to the next slide? And I won't be able to go into any of this in any detail, but I'll just say that there is, you'll see provided by Californians for the Arts that this is part of a much longer presentation that goes into all the developments related to arts relief across the entire region, so that you can put it in that context and look at some of the models where in particular state and local governments have been successful in, again, bringing in private philanthropy and a range of partners to set up relief programs. And I'd say that that is an opportunity as well. And that many of your local governments and other agencies are probably looking for ways to be responsive. And there are a lot of models highlighted in the fuller presentation for you to look at. Thank you.
David, thank you so much. And I think it's important for advocates and people listening to also understand that strategically, what we determined was that we wanted to focus first on the ongoing appropriation in this climate right now, in terms of everybody is needing relief. Really what made sense in terms of reading the room of the legislature and what we were hearing about the California budget was to make sure that we got that $26 million in ongoing funds for the state arts agencies. So we did have a victory there. So in Arizona, for example, they only have $2 million in total state arts agency funds, right? Whereas we have 26 million. So I want people to make sure that you're focused on what California Arts Council is going to do with that 26 million. And remember that they're doing this listening tours this week. They want to hear from you. What is the biggest need that you have right now in terms of that funding? So make sure you check those out again. So we're going to keep moving. And oh, Nina has something she wanted to add. Oh, unmute Nina.
For example, the new 170 million for the NEA, that's all going to be for general operating support with no matches. And that will be not only for upcoming next year, but they're making it retroactive for any outstanding FY19, FY20. That would be an example to put forward to the California Arts Council.
That's right, exactly. And we had done that in this last round as well. And I think that that's important to also note that that is advocacy as well, right? How the funds are actually distributed and spent is part of the advocacy efforts that many of us are doing out there. And that's a good segue to Denny Mangers, who is the title he holds is many, but he is Strategic Advisor for Arts and Culture to Mayor Darrell Steinberg at the City of Sacramento. Welcome, Denny.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah, so Denny and I are going to have a conversation around what's happening in the city of Sacramento currently in terms of direct relationship to CARES Act funding. So the headlines just released. In fact, we just shared that with participants and with our full email list, is that there was $7.5 million in CARES Act funding that the city of Sacramento has allocated for grants to the creative sector. Is that a correct assessment of the headline?
Well, it is a great headline and a recent one, but there's better news, actually. Sacramento, being a city of over 500,000, received a federal relief check in the amount of about $89 million because we had a cultural plan over which our mayor had presided. We had all the data, all the kind of momentum to suggest that there ought to be major investments in the arts because they were an integral part of our economic well-being. And the creative economy, of course, a driver in your broader economic goals. So our mayor actually wrote a proposed framework for the disbursement of the 89 million. And in that framework, he proposed 20 million for arts, culture, and the creative economy. And at the last meeting of the council, our downtown council member, who represents many of our cultural assets, actually proposed that 7.5 be put out right away in an expedited fashion over 6 areas of concern, everywhere from our cultural institutions over to our diversity, independent artists, diversity-oriented nonprofits, et cetera. After 5 million of the 20 goes out to cultural tourism, probably later in the month, there will still be 7.5 more million that the mayor and council intend to put into arts, culture, and the creative economy. So that's kind of the landscape for right now. We have successfully lobbied for the 20. We successfully lobbied to get an early tranche of 7.5 out, and now we'll be lobbying for the next 7.5. And once we get that, we'll then have to turn our attention to lobbying for our own regular annual budget.
So Denny, you know, this is really where we get into the how to be an effective advocate in your local government for arts and culture funding. So tell me, talk to us, the hundreds of people here who are listening, they want to know how to do this in their own cities and their own communities. You're a longtime advocate. You've been a legislature, you've been a chief of staff, you've done all sorts of things in government. What is it that we need to be doing effectively in our communities to see that tipping point where they say, okay, we get it. Arts and culture have value. They're impactful. We need to continue to invest, or we need to invest for the first time, maybe. What is it that you think the advocates need to be doing right now in order to see that funding happen?
Well, as you mentioned at the top of the program, there is no replacement for relationships. So the first thing we need are champions for the arts in every community who develop relationships with their mayor and the members of their city council. And if, like our form of government, where the city manager and his assistant city manager for economic development are very pivotal, them too. So first of all, organizationally, if you have a Friends of Sacramento Arts like we do, the capable Allison Cagley, pals with Donnie Blumenstock, organizing them together as an effective unit to deploy people out to each of your council members and the mayor based on a kind of their own sphere of influence, their relationship with the council member, and most importantly of all, their ability to find people in each of the districts of the decision makers who have a relationship and have a powerful and persuasive narrative. As you said, advocacy is a long game. And so if you have a cultural plan, if you have had a well-established advocacy plan, then you just keep building it. If you don't, you got to start with that essential element of relationship building, and then tailored messages to each. Ever since I was a legislator, I've heard arts advocates trying to hit me with data. But the thing that actually ended up being most persuasive to me was not just the impact of the arts on the economy and the data. It was personal stories that resonated with me with regard to what the arts do for constituents, or people, as we also call them. And so the fact that, especially during this period, kids have been isolated for so long that it's now being identified as a serious mental health issue. Well, hello, arts, music, dance, theater, media, and digital arts are therapeutic and healing in this regard, and we need to see to it they're injected. Also into arts education. I think another really important thing is never walk in alone as an arts advocate. Cultivate allies. When we worked on the transformation of our community center theater, and now with the COVID funds, we're walking in with hotel people and restaurant people and others who depend on the reopening of our institutions for their own livelihoods. Their restaurants are dormant, and hotels the same. So we walk in with allies. That's a very powerful asset. Also, we're in a period right now, especially where we're way behind in the equity and diversity arena. And so we need to make sure that the way we're allocating these funds is equitable. So while it's necessary to make sure that our cultural institutions survive this period and ultimately in a position to thrive and help us rebuild a re-emerging creative economy, we need to make sure that we take our equity partners with us. And so we have developed a scheme is the wrong word probably, but to make sure that our investments in our institutions and our investments in our individual artists, especially those who serve underserved neighborhoods, corridors, populations, and schools, get equal opportunity at this money. And then I can't emphasize enough the importance on the longer term of making sure you're a party to developing a creative plan or a cultural plan with a very distinct equity policy. And if it's adopted by your council, both the plan and the equity grant, then everything you advocate for is in a context of things they've already approved. And it's
Oh, Denny, did you slow down, or is that just me? Did he stop for a second there? Anybody else can tell me that on the chat? That would be great. Did he stop? Yes, okay. Thank you, Dennis has paused. I don't know what happened, Denny, but that was really valuable information for advocates, but you're frozen, as it were. And I think what's important for people to hear, you froze. So here you're back.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. This is the beauty of how we have to work today, right?
Yeah, I was in I must have gotten in a bad Wi-Fi zone, but here I am.
Okay. So I think where we lost you is just in terms of, the importance of making sure that first get the funding, make sure that you are developing those relationships, that your city and your communities are prioritizing the arts, that you're coming with allies, that you're never alone, and then most importantly, that the access to these funds are equitably accessible and distributed. And I just want to mention that we are going to do a follow-up webinar about cultural equity and equitable access and distribution of funds as we're getting those in our communities, because I think that's a very important conversation that we need to have. And so we will be talking about that. We're also working on a webinar on LA County's adoption of the cultural plan that they just had. So a lot of this stuff, as Danny was mentioning, is long game. You've been working on it. Maybe you've been working on data that you've been collecting in your communities about the impact of the arts and culture sector. And now you need to go and make those arguments with the beautiful narratives, the impact statements that you have from your community members as well as your allies about how to actually say this is important and we're in a crisis right now. We need these relief funds, and how critical we are to your communities. Danny,
can you hear me? Because I think you also, you always need to keep in mind that others are going to be operating in terms of demands. There's competition for these dollars from small businesses and other sectors. And so I think it was Frederick Douglass who once said, when speaking to power, make sure that you do so from a position of power. And sometimes the arts community in an area has been dismissed or marginalized for so long that they don't feel powerful. If you don't, you got to create it through the developments of powerful alliances, of learning what makes the political people tick. One actually participates in fundraising activities. One actually engages in PACs and contributes to the lifeblood of the electeds, and get more sophisticated as you observe what professional lobbyists on behalf of trade associations and other corporate interests do. We are such an important part of the economy. We have to gather the strength and power that's convincing to the decision makers. And that's really very important. You have to put on the full armor of God, as the good book says.
Well, I mean, and I think what's also important to know, Denny, is you say not only allies, but there's a lot of people that make advocacy happen, right? It's never one person. And so there's, standing behind you or with you, as it were, are thousands of people in Sacramento who've been working on all of this type of structure and a prioritization to both the mayor and the city council. And so if you're in a community and you're not sure who you're supposed to speak to in terms of organizing around the arts and culture, do you have an advocacy organization in your community? If not, reach out to us. We can certainly help to put you with key people that might live in those communities. But this is a time to absolutely be showing up, be organized, and raise your voice. So, Denny, is there anything else you want to add right now? I'm going to move it to Rick, and then we're going to have some time for Q&A.
Just remember, somebody's going to get that. Somebody's going to get that money, and it really ought to be us, because we're the ones that are providing arts educational opportunities for kids. We're the ones contributing to the quality of life in ways that almost no other sector possibly can. And once you feel kind of the righteousness of our cause, that's what creates the inspiration, the motivation, and the passion that it takes to go be an effective advocate.
That's great. Denny, thank you so much for your words of wisdom. And you've been someone who's definitely been in it for the long game. And
sorry, I froze up.
no, you're fine. So Rick, I'm going to hand it to you now. And Rick is the CEO and Executive Director of Arts Orange County. And he's also the former board president for Californians for the Arts in California, arts advocate, a very well-known long-term, long game arts advocate here in California. And Rick, will you talk to us about what's been happening for you in Orange County, which of course has a lot of different size communities, and what you've been doing in terms of advocacy for CARES Act?
Thank you so much, Julie, for all you do. And also thank you, Jade, for putting up on screen my slides. And thank you to Nina and David and Denny, and also to Deborah for sharing today. You know, just amazing stuff that people are doing in the field. And how urgent it is in terms of the need right now. So I want to begin very quickly about telling you who we are. So Arts Orange County is the 25-year-old local arts agency, nonprofit arts council in Orange County, California. We serve 3.2 million people. We have 34 cities. According to the Otis report, we have 700 arts organizations. I haven't met all of them yet. And more than 50,000 people are employed in the creative industries locally. And one of our primary functions is to advocate, but we also conduct a number of programs and services where we actually are contracted by some of our cities and other governmental entities in the area of cultural planning and project management, which enables us to rub elbows quite a bit with some of the decision makers. And that also includes the Congressional Art Contest for 5 of the congressional districts here. So we work closely with those members of Congress and their staffs and have built strong relationships there as well, all of which then kind of feeds our ability to succeed as arts advocates. We have 7 congressional art districts, 5 senatorial districts, 7 assembly districts. There are 5 supervisorial districts and 34 cities. So this is a considerable amount of ground to have to cover. And it's not a particularly easy task because, next slide, Jade. I have a once upon a time in the County of Orange story. And those of you who are thinking how things are so surreal these days may also remember one of the most surreal, wonderful, cartoon shows that we baby boomers used to watch back in the 60s, Rocky and Bullwinkle, which had its fractured fairy tales. And I'm going to tell you a fractured fairy tale of the CARES Act funds in Orange County and how we got a piece of it. And so next slide, please, Jade. So the County of Orange got over $500 million in CARES Act funds. The vast majority of it went to urgent needs, healthcare, public health, homelessness, food distribution, etc. They actually contracted quite a bit out to not-for-profit organizations that are social service organizations. And then they allocated $26 million directly to the cities for assistance. That left $75 million for small business grants. So when all of this was coming down the pike, and Jade, please, next slide. We had already launched into action. I'm not going to go through every single bullet point, but the basics here are that Arts Orange County, like most local arts agencies, immediately launched into action to do a number of things to serve its community. We converted our online arts calendar to be all about closures, online and virtual programming, and then phased reopenings. We also immediately thought about approaching the county for the CARES Act funding. And there's a public affairs consultant here in Orange County, longtime GOP consultant, who happens to be a former ballet dancer. He and his wife were longtime ballet dancers, and he was a board member of Arts Orange County a number of years ago. And he provides us with pro bono services, and he knows personally the 4 GOP county supervisors, as well as many other elected officials. And in fact, he bundles funds for their campaigns quite often. So he is greatly beloved by them, and they take his calls. So we talked with him, and he gladly agreed to assist us on this project. And we also knew we needed data, so we immediately launched doing a survey of our arts community on the impact of COVID-19. We stole a lot from Americans for the Arts. They started a survey pretty early on when the crisis hit. And that provided us with excellent data to leverage first the Community Foundation, because the Community Foundation here had launched a resilience fund for the community. It did not exclude the arts, but they basically were not giving to the arts. They were giving to the neediest cases on the front lines. And we waited a respectful amount of time before we approached them with our data and said, so now that you've raised $5 million for that purpose, would you now consider working with us for an arts resilience fund? And so they did, and we set one up. We did find out about a CARES Act program that most of us don't know about through the Economic Development Administration. And that provides funds for tourism, among other things that cities and nonprofits can actually apply for. I don't know whether it's still open, but we persuaded the city of Costa Mesa, which has a very large arts footprint and tourism program, to apply for those funds. We did approach the Board of Supervisors early on and said we wanted to make sure that they knew the arts were on the radar and needed funding, needed relief. We're the first to close, we'll be the last to reopen. And with their discussions of how the CARES Act small business funds might be applied, that nonprofit arts are small businesses too. We then luckily had a meeting with one of the supervisors, Don Wagner in District 3, who is a Republican. He's a former assemblyman up in Sacramento. And he has not necessarily in the past been a big proponent of public funding for the arts. He never supported funding for the California Arts Council. So we were skeptical going in that he would be supportive. And yet he hatched an idea in that meeting. And by the way, in the meeting, we brought with us our political consultant. We brought several arts leaders of major arts organizations within his district. And we brought in a major GOP donor to his and other campaigns, who's a major arts patron. So we had a Zoom meeting with him. And he really engaged with us, and he concocted an idea that every one of the 5 supervisor districts should chip in some money and create an arts relief fund from the CARES Act. And he also wanted it to be matched with private funding if that could be done. So we also delivered a letter to the Board of Supervisors signed by 52 arts organizations. And Jade, please, next slide. But this is what they did. They created a fractured plan, a cockamamie plan. And so each supervisor's district got $15 million to distribute. 2 of them decided to divide it up and just on a per capita basis, give it to the cities in their district and not have anything to do with managing it. The other 3 districts each did their own plan, own deadlines, own guidelines, own eligibility. Under the District 2 and 3 plans, nonprofits were not eligible to apply. Under the District 1, 4, and 5 plans, nonprofits were eligible to apply. So our first step, next slide, Jade, please, was to get the word out to our arts organizations in Orange County by district. In other words, you are in District 1. Here is what we know about the small business grants. Deadlines, guidelines, there's eligibility requirements. You may or may not be eligible, but nonprofits are eligible. Here, go for it. We also reached out to the 9 largest cities, mayors and councils, some of whom were, managing their own CARES Act funds. Some of them were managing the county's funds. So this was very crazy as well. So we had to not only lobby the 5 individual supervisors of the county, but 9 different cities. The other cities, we couldn't even take that on as well. So we had great success with the city of Costa Mesa, which has the Segerstrom Center for the Arts campus with, it's a major performing arts center for the county. And they unanimously, and it's a divided council, GOP and Democrat, they unanimously approved $184,000 for nonprofit arts. And we were just ecstatic. And then the county told them they couldn't do it. The county said, oh, well, the contract between District 2 supervisor and the cities in her district did not include nonprofits, therefore you cannot grant to nonprofits. So we are fighting that battle now. But Supervisor Wagner, when he saw that the other districts weren't going to go in on his idea of every district throw some into an arts relief plan, he decided to do it anyway. He had money from his unincorporated areas of the district, and he took $500,000, which that's 5% of his 15 million, to allocate for the arts in District 3. There's about 20 arts organizations there, small, medium, and large. And he said, I'm going to hand the money over to you, to your Arts Resilience Fund, to manage the whole program and accept the applications and all of that. So he is going to be announcing this, I believe, tomorrow publicly. It's a great win for the arts. Meanwhile, we're still battling for that Costa Mesa money. So finally, if you look at the last slide, Jade, then this is kind of a summary of how Orange County has fared on COVID relief efforts. So we got the District 3 $500,000. 5 of our organizations got the $50,000 NEA grants. We've raised $150,000 already in private funding for the Resilience Fund. In Laguna Beach, they were part of District 5. They were on a lottery system there. So there were 6 organizations that got $10,000 CARES Act grants. CAC, as some of you might know, is awarding their NEA CARES Act money evenly to all, of the state local partners. And not all of them have opted in, but it'll wind up being roughly $15,000 per county, which we are then to re-grant to small organizations serving disadvantage. That brings us up to almost $1 million. If we get the Costa Mesa money, we'll be over $1 million. And then there's still some grant decisions, from those individual county districts to be made. And next slide, Jade, the end. I'm exhausted, but let me just say one last thing, because I think that Denny made some excellent points in terms of kind of the relationship building and laying the groundwork. We didn't get what we wanted here, but this was not an effort wasted. We did get some money, and we established and reinforced relationships. We got the arts on the radar screen of the Board of Supervisors where it has never been. And, yes, we can grouse about the fact that it wasn't their money and it was easy enough for them to give it away. Why didn't they give us more? But the bottom line is we are now on their radar screen. We've laid the groundwork for future advocacy efforts, and we're not stopping here. And if any of the people in Orange County who are on the call, need some guidance on, which one of these districts they're in and which to apply for, some have closed their deadlines, some are still open, just please contact me and I'll be happy to let you know. We're trying to get the word out there through our newsletters and email blasts and the like. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And sorry, and love for the rest of the group to come back up. And I wanted to introduce also our special guest, Deborah Lucera, who is also a board member. She's executive director of Friends of the North Upstate, and she's also a supervisor in Butte County. And Deborah represents a rural community here in Northern California, has been a longtime arts leader and arts advocate. And Deborah, I just would love your perspective, and we'll get to some other Q&A too, but your perspective on what it is from a supervisor's standpoint, an elected official, what is that really makes a difference in terms of the communication strategies that advocates can employ right now with some of these funds that are coming to the rural communities from the state budget that we didn't get from the feds, but we're getting from the state budget. So it's coming in, Nevada County is getting 10 million, for example. What's the best way for us to make sure that our voices are heard to our electeds right now, in particular for rural communities?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you, Rick. That was a wonderful presentation. It just sums up the arts and politics, really. It sums it up. Getting arts in front of the supervisors has been a long-term goal of mine. And when they just refuse to fund the arts, which by the way, the Board of Supervisors in Butte County does not fund our Arts Council and never has. This is very common in a lot of rural communities. First of all, Butte County is home to 220,000 people. You may have heard of Butte County. We were home to the devastating Camp Fire, which took 14,000 homes and 5,000 businesses. And we were just in the midst of recovering from the Oroville Dam spillway incident the year before that. So we have been a particularly hard hit county. We have so many needs. We still have people camping in the area, in the burn scar area. We still have food trucks that are coming up from Contra Costa County and from Solano County every Sunday to feed our people. We simply don't even have enough food. So when you talk about arts, believe me, it is not something that is at the top of the list for most politicians and for our community. However, we have artists, as I like to say, you know, the second responders who have been responding from the beginning. They are going out to these hard hit places. It almost makes me cry just how much dedication they have shown to our community, whether it's building bird nests out of boxes and supplying the materials to these local communities just to give the kids something to do, to raise funds for these underfunded organizations. There is just so much need in our community that it's very difficult to rally support right now for the arts. However, in Butte County, we have 22 million that was dedicated to Butte County through the CARES Act funding and through the state. And we will be deciding as a Board of Supervisors how those funds are going to be split up. So I was quite inspired actually by Rick's presentation, you know, because I thought, wow, that's really wonderful that all of this support went toward arts organizations and the idea of cultural tourism and the idea that this is part of a huge segment, particularly of Orange County. And in Butte County, we relied heavily on tourism. So with COVID, with the Camp Fire, with the Oroville spillway incident, our tourism sector has been pretty much obliterated. But what took its place are the thousands, literally the thousands of workers who have come into our county to rebuild Butte County. So they've been filling up our hotels. They've been eating in our restaurants. They've been doing all of that tourists were no longer doing, but now COVID. So we are readjusting. And I would say what's really important to supervisors to hear, and Rick hit it, was that the idea of organizing 52 organizations to write letters to the Board of Supervisors to talk about the work that these organizations do in each county is extremely important. We read our letters. We get those letters. You send them to the clerk of the board. It's difficult now in times of COVID, like our board chambers are not open to the public because they're so small. We can't even separate 6 feet ourselves. Only 3 of us fit up on the dais and 2 of us call in just to accommodate COVID. So getting to officials right now is difficult, and letter writing, I find, is the best way to do it. Often and very succinct, and don't use the form letter. Write from, you know, write 10 different things, if you will. You can still use a letter writing campaign, but don't say the same thing over and over. Have 10 points and have 10 different people make those points. But don't use the same form letter, because they won't, you know, they'll start to see it and then they'll just, that's it, we're not reading that, it's just the same thing. So I would suggest, I love the idea of tapping into resources and the expertise of local arts organizations who are always eager to help this tight-knit community. We already have lost in place a theater location that was downtown. They simply can't afford the rent. So we're beginning to see the ripple effect of our businesses closing down. And what I don't think has been the case has been made in a lot of rural areas is just how important arts and culture are to these small communities. I sit on the National Association of Counties, and what I've learned is that there are over 3,000 counties. And so there are commissioners and supervisors just like me all across the country. And I sit particularly on the Arts and Culture subcommittee. And what I find so refreshing is that counties across America are recognizing the importance of the arts, particularly in time of isolation. They're recognizing that you can have a song, you can have a poem, you can work with your children and doing small projects. So arts and culture right now, I believe we're in an unprecedented time to actually make the case. We are making the case just by the need that we have, being isolated from one another and needing to find ways to reach out. So I would also suggest leveraging online platforms to swap information with other artists and arts organizations. Again, you need to organize. We took our CARES funding that we're going to get from I'm put on my other hat, my arts hat, and we went to our local community foundation and said, would you match this funding? If we get $15,000 from the California Arts Council for communities of color or underserved communities, would you match this? And it was just a resounding yes. Yeah, we'll do that, of course. So we have some real opportunities. So now instead of 15,000, we have 30,000. So
yeah, I think that's really an important point, the leveraging public-private partnership. I know that, government does like to see that. They don't ever like to see, that's why you have those matches and grants all the time, right? They don't want to see that people or organizations become reliant upon government dollars, right? So they always want to see that happening. So anytime you can leverage that in your community, there is a real strong benefit to that. We've gone over a little bit of time, but I'm hoping that everyone has gotten some really practical examples of what can be done within your own local community. We have some amazing advocates here on the call and invite you all back, David, to come back as well. And I don't see actually any other Q&A because it's mostly been answered as we've been going in the chat. I know all of these folks here on the call today are available. Somebody even asked, can I talk to Denny? And he gave out his phone number, and Rick's given out his email, and I'm sure Deborah would give out her email as well in terms of, getting inside of the brain of a supervisor. She really understands from that perspective, which I think is really important. You have amazing experts here in California to help you out. And I think everybody here has illustrated an important point, which is also to find a good advisor within your own community who has the ear of those elected officials or multiple elected officials. So really finding those people, in Sacramento, it is Denny who has the ear of the mayor. He is the pro bono consultant to the mayor for arts and culture. Advocates have figured to work with him. Rick has learned that there's a person from who you mentioned, right, Rick? That was really critical. Deborah, I'm sure, Deborah is the person. She's a supervisor. So finding those allies and those strong voices within your own community. Do you guys have any quick advice on how to do that within your own community? Like, what's the best way to figure out who has the ear of your elected officials if you don't know that, if it's not apparent? Any advice on that?
One way, and I think Rick pointed it out, is you can go to the Secretary of State's website and find out who contribute to every member of your council or your board of supervisors. And when you look down that list with companions from the arts community, you can quickly identify among people that are very close, major contributors. You can identify people who are art supporters and big political supporters. Rick harnessed them in a county where there hasn't been a lot of sensitivity to the arts. He's taking a pretty political approach. I thought that was brilliant. Yeah. That's one tactic. But if you ever sit down with a group of people who are prominent in the arts and who know your council members, they will come up quickly with names that they know that are close to each of those people. And then you can just go out, brief them, train them, and deploy them when you get into your advocacy programs. People that you know are tight with the members. I've known our mayor for 25 years, served with him in the Senate, et cetera. So that's a natural. But there's a lot of other people like me who are tight with the mayor and members of our council and supervisors to go after.
Excellent.
It's easy to find out that information other ways too, like just through people-to-people contact. We know, for example, that Wiley Aitken, has been a long time Democratic leader in Orange County and donor and arts patron. So when it comes to Democratic elected officials, go to Wiley, and he'll help help us with connecting with those officials. And so it is often just a matter of, who do you know who is a member of the GOP or a member of the Democratic Party and a prominent donor to those causes. They're usually very visible in the community, social events and the like. So, and if their name pops up there as a major arts patron as well, then it's which one of your arts organizations are they helping? And so the CEO of that arts organization or the development director will definitely know that arts patron and help connect you to them.
And for rural communities, what I would suggest, because a lot of people don't think of the arts as something that they want to support, but I usually try to go to something that appeals to them. For instance, like in rural communities, FFA, Future Farmers of America, many of their projects are around the arts, they're around arts and crafts where they're creating things. They are also heavily involved in rural counties in the county fairs. And a lot of the kids spend a lot of time either doing art projects or raising a pig or raising a hog or whatever it might be, or some kind of other animal, to sell at the fair. You have to understand what's important to the other supervisors and commissioners. And you have to be able to talk that talk. And if you can't talk that talk, you need to find someone who can, and then relate it back to creativity somehow, and make it important to them.
Right? Be prepared, do your homework.
Yes.
Look people up, read their websites, read what their interests are. I think this is great advice in terms of finding out who are the people that have the ear of people in government and your elected officials. I do want to add, there is a question that's open still, and it is, how do we advocate for the small arts organizations when, right now we're in a place where, this is unprecedented in terms of everybody is shut down and everybody is losing a lot of money. But how do we advocate for the small budget arts organizations when oftentimes it's the big organizations that are getting the attention because maybe they have those relationships already established? What's the advice there for the smaller budget arts organizations and maybe even the individual artists as well?
My first advice would be to go, if you have a state local partner in your county, which I believe 54, is it 54, Julie, have
Correct.
a state local partner. That would be where I would go first, because that's part of what a state local partner should be doing, is looking out for small organizations in their county. Also, I would suggest, if you have a community foundation, I hope you have a relationship with your community foundation. Because those foundations are extremely important, and there are a lot of patrons that want to support creative organizations and ideas. I would start with those two places.
We have devoted 20% of our Arts Resilience Fund to go to individual artist grants. And so, and then of course, a lot of the other grants will go to arts organizations of all sizes. The CAC allocation is definitely going to be devoted to the smallest organizations that are working primarily in disadvantaged communities.
Yeah.
But yeah, we tend to know where they are, but we don't know everyone. And so I would encourage people to contact us. If you're in Orange County and you're a small organization, you might not be on our radar screen.
Yeah.
So in other words, the state local partners in most communities are what we call the arts councils, right? So they might not all have that name. So Rick is a state local partner. You can look up that list. We can provide that list if you're listening and you're not sure who your state local partner is in your community. As there's 58 counties in California, 54 out of 58 are in existence in the smallest of communities, Sierra County, et cetera. So definitely access those resources. I want to be mindful of time, and it's already 11:20. There's so much to talk about in how do we access funds? How do we be effective advocates? How do we do it on the local level? How do we do it on the state level? How do we do it on the federal level? We'll continue these conversations. We're not done. But I just want to also assure everyone who's here still listening that, you know, we have amazing resources both in California and in our region, and through Westhoff, and federally through Americans for the Arts, and of course through our organization Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. You know, two of the people here on this call, Deborah and Rick, are on our board. And so, you know, reach out, contact us, use us. We are all in this together. These are scary and uncertain times for everybody. And there's a lot that we need to learn from each other. And we are here to be that resource as much as we can. So I want to thank all of our amazing speakers today. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and your wisdom. And again, if anybody has any further questions that were not answered, or you didn't want to do it in this form, please reach out to us. My email is membership@californiansforthearts.org. Happy and to speak with anyone here. So any final parting words of wisdom from any of our esteemed speakers? I'll open it up quickly and then we'll take it as a wrap.
Go get the money.
Thank you.
All right, go get the money. All right, so thanks everybody for listening, for everyone who signed on, and thanks again to all of our presenters today. And advocacy works. Get to work, everybody. We can do this. Thank you.